Welcome to the 19th video in the Colored Pencil course, brought to you by thevirtualinstructor.com, Watercolor and Colored Pencils Part 2. In this module, we'll continue our look at combining watercolor and colored pencils and complete the drawing that was started in the previous module. In the last module, an underpainting was established using a series of transparent watercolor washes. This painting creates a base layer in which colored pencils can be applied. Colors are enriched by the subsequent colored pencil applications, and a variety of textures and color intensities can be created. So let's pick up where we left off in the last module. We'll continue adding colored pencil applications over the top of the watercolor washes. Here I'm adding more seeds to the bottom portion of the strawberry, using a heavy application of cream. Shadowed areas and areas of contrast are created using a dark umber. This helps further the illusion of the light source originating from the left side. Areas are burnished here using a colorless blender in order to preserve the medium to dark values that exist here. Crimson red is used to define the edges of the areas of intense highlight that were preserved with the liquid mask in the last module. To make the recesses feel more realistic, we'll push the areas that protrude around them using white. Then we'll use Crimson Lake, which is a darker value of red, to further define the recesses in the strawberry. This will provide the necessary value range to make the dimples feel like they recede into the skin of the strawberry. We'll repeat this process for all of the seed dimples around the body of the strawberry, starting with Crimson Red, defining the shadow with dark umber, and then enhancing that shadow inside of the dimple using Crimson Lake. As this progression continues around all of the seeds on the strawberry, some areas will be left alone with no colored pencil application, allowing the watercolor wash underneath to show through. In this case, the texture that's produced by the underlying watercolor wash is more desirable and is more closely related to what is observed in the photo reference. Therefore, allowing the watercolor wash to show through and not covering it with colored pencils is a better decision. We can burnish the areas around the edges of the dimples where the Crimson Red meets the watercolor wash. This will create a smoother transition between the two areas of texture. And here again, the protruding areas between each seed dimple is enhanced using an application of white. Although the left edge of the strawberry is closest to the light source, there is an area where the strawberry curves around that becomes a slight bit darker. Making this darker with Crimson Red will further the illusion of form. With the body of the strawberry complete, we can now turn our attention to the leaves of the strawberry. We'll begin by laying down an application of indigo blue in the darkest areas. Blue is used because it is the darker of the two colors that are used to mix green. Of course, green is mixed by yellow and blue. Therefore, highlighted areas will naturally be more yellow in nature, while shadowed areas will be more blue. We'll think about the cross contours that exist on the leaves as we make marks. They should follow the contours of the leaf itself, changing for each individual leaf. What we are creating here is a secondary underpainting of sorts. We'll layer over the top of these applications with green later in the process. Using the indigo blue, we can start to establish some of the details that will be visible on the leaves. For example, initial lines where veins of the leaves might be visible can be created here. Now that we've established the darker areas on the leaves, we can go back over the top of these areas using olive green with a heavy application. The indigo blue and the olive green will naturally mix as this color is applied. This mixture of colors more closely resembles what is observed in the photo reference. As the olive green is applied, thought is still given to the cross contours and the overall texture of the leaves. These colors are further burnished using a colorless blender. Even in the areas of the leaves, we'll still allow some of the watercolor wash to show through. In other words, the entire area is not covered with colored pencil. While there are still darker values to be developed, we'll go ahead and turn our attention to some of the visible veins on this particular leaf. In this case, these veins are lighter in value, therefore a sharpened lemon yellow is used to establish these lines. We'll take the lemon yellow and establish some of the highlights that exist on other leaves as well. This color can also be used to burnish any additional areas that need to be smoothed. Now we'll return back to the indigo blue and further define some of the details. Here, a few veins are added. A few additional details can be added as well. We can also enhance the edge of some of the leaves if need be. In between each of the light yellow veins that are visible on this particular leaf, we'll add a bit of shadow using the indigo blue. This will make these veins appear stronger and increase the contrast between the light and dark values. We can burnish this application using a colorless blender. We'll further enhance the color on the leaves and burnish a few areas using lime peel. This application mutes the contrast between the dark and light areas, making the leaf feel a bit more natural. The last area to be addressed is the cast shadow underneath the strawberry. We'll begin by laying down a medium application of indigo blue. The cast shadow will be darker right underneath the strawberry, so additional pressure is applied there. This area is then burnished using a colorless blender. Dark umber is used to make the shadow a bit darker, especially right underneath the strawberry. The shadow is then lastly burnished using a colorless blender to complete the image. So what did we discuss in this module? Well, we completed the image that was started in the previous module by layering colored pencils over watercolor washes enriching the color and creating a variety of color intensities. We learned that combining watercolor and colored pencils provides more opportunities for artists to create a variety of effects by exploiting the strengths of each medium. In the next module of this series, we'll take a look at watercolor pencils.